It's kind of hard to argue against that, isn't it, Richard Barrett?
It's very easy to argue against that.
Well, the last point that he made there, I'm not talking about the rest of it.
Well, in fact, the European forces are involving themselves in the Darfur conflict via Chad, and the way in which they're involving themselves should alarm people deeply, because the French have for many years now been propping up a dictatorship involved in using child soldiers, killing its political opponents, and a dictatorship, most importantly, that is backing rebel groups who are up to their necks in blood in the Darfur conflict. And Irish troops are now going in and providing a shield for both the French, essentially a colonial military expedition in Chad, and a shield for the Deby regime, who warmly welcomed Irish troops getting there. And something that should alarm people very deeply is that in the last few weeks, Irish Rangers, the elite Irish Rangers, were ambushed by rebels opposed to the Chad regime and narrowly escaped a major firefight because the rebels made it clear to them that they believed that Irish troops, regardless of what they believed they were doing there, were in fact part of the French mission that was propping up the regime.
And specifically then on Sarah's question, will Lisbon change the work that the Irish Army does?
Absolutely it will, because Ireland is already involved in the battle groups, and what the Lisbon Treaty does is expands the military tasks that the battle groups, which Ireland is already involved in, can engage in, from purely peacekeeping tasks to what they call peacemaking, and to contributing to the fight against terrorism. Now, of course, peacemaking, as John Bruton even admitted, is a euphemism for war, and the fight against terrorism, as we know from the Iraq War, is a sort of ill-defined phrase that was used to justify an aggressive military war, which was really about oil in Iraq, with such devastating consequences. And just to spell this out very, very clearly, the only protection that is being put forward by the yes side for our neutrality is a commitment that there will be a referendum before Ireland joins a common defence, which the Lisbon Treaty says will be established at some point, right? But the problem is, what does common defence mean? Lisbon establishes a common defence policy, which by signing it up to would allow the Irish government to deploy troops in Iraq at the moment.
Okay, Laurent Pech, you were very keen to get in on some of those points, and then I will go back to our other contributors.
Yeah, no, I should repeat this essential point. The Lisbon Treaty would have no impact whatsoever on the Irish tradition of military neutrality. It is for the Irish government, with the Irish Parliament, to decide on a case-by-case basis whether they want to participate in peacemaking missions. I just wanted to get back on the point that there is the fight against terrorism is mentioned in the Treaty of Lisbon. I'd be interested in actually knowing the provision where it is stated that the EU should send troops to fight against terrorism in the Treaty of Lisbon.
Article 28B.
Could you read it, maybe?
Yes, I could, yes. The tasks referred to in Article 28A, in the course of which the Union may use civilian and military means, shall include joint disarmament operations, humanitarian rescue tasks, military advice and assistance, conflict prevention and peacekeeping tasks, tasks of combat forces and crisis management, including peacemaking, post-conflict stabilisation, and all these tasks may contribute to the fight against terrorism, including supporting third countries, i.e. non-EU countries, in combating terrorism in their territories. Now, that's pretty clear.
Laurent Pech?
So do you understand this provision as stating that Ireland is compelled to send troops to fight terrorism, no matter, irrespective of the situation?
Yes, because this refers to Article 28A, which says the common security and defence policy will now be an integral part of the common foreign and security policy, right, which Ireland is signing up to, and we will be signing up to by voting for the Lisbon Treaty.
I'm going to get another perspective on this now, this time from Gavin Barrett, and again the question is, will Lisbon change the work that the Irish Army does?
The answer to that for me is only if we in Ireland wanted to. That's the answer to it, because every provision in the relevant provisions concerning the common security and defence policy is subject to a provision, and let me quote this from Article 42 of the treaty. The policy of the Union in accordance with this section shall not prejudice the specific character of the security and defence policy of certain member states. That's a very specific reference, not a vague one at all. And the reason that language is used is because, I mean, Kieran himself has actually raised questions over whether Ireland currently constitutes a neutral state or not. Basically, that throws it back to the member states themselves. You define your own security and defence character. So It will be without prejudice to that. That's the first point. The second point is that all of the major decision-making in this area is by unanimity as well. That gives us a defence there as well. And thirdly, what we can do in this area is opt into, including the battle groups that have been mentioned there, very badly named, but there you have it anyway, the battle groups which already exist, we can opt into any of those or opt out of them as we want. We're not forced to take part in relation to anything at all. And as for it creating a mutual defence pact, that can only happen if the member states agree to it unanimously. That was already in the treaties there already. It said it might lead in due course to a common defence. It now says either there are two separate provisions. One of them says it might lead to a common defence. The other one says it will, provided the member states agree to it unanimously. And we're not going to do that.
Well, Richard, there will only be change if we want it.
No, see, our constitutional arrangements and the protection, if you like, that exists for neutrality, which the government is offering us as a protection, is, as I mentioned, a promise that we won't join a common defence unless there's a referendum, and the so-called triple lock. Now, common defence is not defined, right? This is the point. What is a common defence? Well, in fact, it's just a word, it's just jargon, but a common defence policy is spelt out in the Lisbon Treaty, and the Common Defence Policy gives, it says, shall provide the Union with operational capacity, drawing on civilian and military assets. The Union may use them on missions outside the Union for peacekeeping, conflict prevention, etc. Okay, so the defence policy will allow for the battle groups to engage in conflicts outside Europe as it stands. And the only protection that we have for that is the triple lock. And the triple lock would, as I stressed earlier on, would allow the government to, for example, deploy troops to Iraq because it has UN, the occupation of Iraq has UN backing. So, and my point here is, the saying that the government are the guardians of our neutrality is not a protection of our neutrality. Our neutrality is a constitutional thing. It's something about the people, a tradition. They have no right to hand it away, but our government, under the provisions of Lisbon, can involve us in an EU military force that will be engaging in things that have nothing to do with neutrality.
All right, we're starting to run up against our time on this particular question, but I'm going to get a response from Gavin Barrett and then I'll move on to question 4 on our list.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank Richard for having reminded me something which I omitted to mention, because apart from the protection under Article 42, which is the section that I quoted you from, the without prejudice clause, secondly, and the unanimity rule, which I also mentioned in that regard, there is, of course, the constitutional protection in this regard as well. And on top of that, of course, we have our democratically, and let's remind ourselves, our democratically elected government to decide what action we take in this regard as well. That's what we elect. We live in a representative democracy. If we're not going to have our elected government decide this kind of thing, who would they suggest we get to decide?
Richard, I get the sense that you're not very impressed, but as I said, I am going to move on to the next question. I will come to you first on that particular question.